The Dwarfs are one of the toughest defensive factions in the game. They keep to themselves whilst forging strong alliances between the clans, making journeys through the mountains a danger for anyone over the height of 4'2". In battle, they're one of the hardest factions to crack with armour thicker than Dryker and enough gunpowder to sink several battleships. So how do you go about being such a resilient faction? Let's dive in and find out. But real quick, let me tell you how to get some cheap games with instant gaming. You want to pick up the latest Warhammer 3 DLC or any other DLC or Warhammer game, but don't want to spend your life savings in the process? Instant Gaming is here to the rescue. They have everything from Warhammer 1 all the way up to Thrones of Decay and everything in between at a fraction of the full price. Not to mention the approximately 25 trillion other games they have for incredibly low prices. Bannerlords, 50% off. Helldivers 2, nearly 30% off. No PSN sign-up required. They sell keys for almost every store known to man for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, hell, even the Switch. With over 700,000 reviews on Trustpilot, they have a 4.7 out of 5, so you know you're in safe hands no matter what. Check out Instant Gaming using the link in the description, grab yourself some cheap games, and support the channel in the process. And of course, thank you to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Now, let's get back to those dwarves. As always, let's start with the campaign. Honestly, the dwarves don't have that many things in the campaign that make them hard to beat, but the first is definitely their mountain home and the underways. First of all, the mountains, it's just difficult to get around if you don't have access to the underways. Just getting through their territory at all, even if you're not fighting them, is going to be extremely slow going. If you are fighting them, then chasing their army through there will be even harder. Fortunately though, the underways, as we've covered many times in this series, are fairly easy to counter. You just go with the usual strategies of baiting them with a weaker army or a settlement and keep a stronger army nearby an ambush stand to move in once they get close. If your lord has any interception skills, then grab those, but this won't be for every faction, so don't rely on it. One good thing about their mountain home is that there are lots of narrow corridors, so it can be hard for them to get past you without the risk of fighting. Just be sure that you have a fully stocked army, since they'll probably be in the mountains a while if you don't plan to set up shop there. The next problem with the dwarves is the fact that they are strong members of the Order Tide. They do normally keep to themselves, but occasionally they make some friends outside of the mountains. In particular, the dwarves are normally best buds with all of the other dwarves, so warring against one normally means warring against more of them, especially later on. Once the Order Tide is fully online, they'll be a key part of it. This means they're going to have lots of resources and money, so lots of armies and lots of allies should war break out. You can use the join war function to get around this for a little while, but normally their allies will join the war before long, especially if the balance of power tells them they can win. Once you are at war, try to take them down quickly so you can avoid fighting battles against multiple armies from multiple factions at the same time. Now, the last thing about the dwarves in the campaign is the Ages of Reckoning and the Grudge Settlers. Now, I'm not entirely sure if they can use the entire mechanic, but what I do know is that they can at the very least get the Grudge Settlers units. This gives them instantly summonable units with enhanced stats over base versions. There's not really much you can do to counter this outside of be ready for them to pull a lot of strong units out their ass at a moment's notice. It also means if you beat their armies back, especially in the late game once they've stocked up some of these units, don't be surprised if they rock up with a full stack in a matter of turns. Moving over to battle, which as usual is probably the place where you're going to have the most trouble with the dwarves. First up, they have incredibly tough front lines. Their basic infantry units have more armor than some factions' most elite troops. Late game, they have some of the highest armor stats in the game alongside extremely high defense. What I'm getting at is, it's almost impossible to beat them in melee without a ton of high melee attack and armor piercing. Most of their units also have shields, so missiles will be effective if they're hitting them head on. They do have some non-shielded high armor piercing damage options too, but the toughness is really what you want to worry about. Since their damage is so low on the non-damage focused options, you can throw as much as you want at them without worrying about too much coming back. Sending monsters into the front lines to break through their armor will be a good call. Flanking with armor piercing ranged units to fly into their backs will also work, but is more risky. Honestly, the problem with their front lines is how long they can stop you from getting into the rest of their army, rather than the damage they can do themselves. So if you can get around them completely, that also works. Next part about their roster you want to be worried about is their powerful ranged units. Most of their damage is going to come from ranged. Pardon the pun, but they have a range of options, and the highest damage is normally some form of Thunderer. They have high armor piercing, but they do need a line of sight. Iron Drakes can also be devastating, but generally result in some friendly fire and not as much armor piercing, so are slightly less of a concern. One benefit of the dwarf's height is that since they're so short, their melee infantry don't block ranged units from having line of sight onto enemy melee infantry, so their range can stay safe at the back and shoot onto enemy units no problem. All of their ranged infantry also have high armor and halfway decent defense, making them difficult to take down fast. Cycle charging will generally be your best bet to take them down quickly. Sustained combat will also work, but will take a lot longer, giving them chance to bring in support. While we're on the topic of ranged, they also have artillery that is extremely strong. Similar to ranged infantry, a lot of their damage is going to come from here. They have options for high armor piercing, area damage, and of course, massive range. These are significantly easier to take down in melee, but getting that close will be a challenge all on its own. The main issue with these guys is getting to them through the melee infantry whilst avoiding getting picked apart by ranged, so fast moving units are the way to go. Flyers or cav will get the job done nicely, just make sure they get there in enough pieces to get the job done before backup arrives. The Dwarves also have their airborne war machines. With the recent patch, these are deadlier than ever with increased unit sizes and tons of bombs. The Thunder Barge in particular can be devastating if left to do work, so focusing down these units with range damage will be the way to go to take them out fast. They're also awful in melee, so if you get them locked in combat, this will stop them from attacking and likely take them down if you're using something halfway decent. A couple of things for the entire roster for the Dwarves. Basically everything has pretty high leadership. They don't get much lower than 60, which is about as high as the vampire counts ever get, so they're really hard to break. This is a problem for basically everything and means you're going to have to put in a lot more work to put them away than other factions. You can either grind and try and take them out through brute force over a longer period of time, or use leadership sapping tactics to try and break them faster. The standard methods of breaking leadership apply to the Dwarves the same as every other faction. Taking out lords and heroes will remove any encouragement bonuses, as well as giving nearby units a penalty for their lord fleeing or dying. Surrounding units in melee drains their leadership very quickly. Bursts of high damage give massive temporary penalties, but these can be recovered from if you don't keep up the pressure and break the unit fast. Fear and Terror also help a bit, but not every faction has access to these, so again, I'm not going to rely on this. Another fun quirk about almost the entire Dwarf roster is their resistance to magic. Pretty much every unit has some level of spell resistance, making spell-based damage a lot less effective. Hex spells will be fine as well as augments for your own troops, but avoid using damage spells as they'll generally get you a lot less value for your wins. There isn't much of a counter to this one, so you just have to play around it instead. Now, one good thing about fighting the Dwarves is that they're generally one of the slowest factions in the game. Those little legs and heavy armor add up to an army that is incredibly sluggish. Most of the time, they can stand still to fight you, so it's normally not a problem, but if you play to flank them, they are going to struggle to stop you. Attacking their backlines will be a little bit easier, even if they take longer to go down, you'll still have more time before the reinforcements arrive, so it about evens out. If you can find ways to use their slow speed to your advantage, you'll have a much easier time, so constantly be flanking or keeping them out of position, pressure their backlines even if you can't attack them to keep them from firing, and as soon as the unit is out of position, swarm on it to take it down as fast as you can, ideally before help arrives. If they have any units retreating, chase them down to wipe them out, to not only push for army losses, but make sure you don't have to fight them in a later battle. Now, for both this and the leadership, there are a few outliers. Slay units are unbreakable and a lot faster than non-Slay units. They aren't cav level speed, but they're still plenty speedy and can give you a lot of trouble if you attack them in the wrong way. However, Slayers also lack any armor, so are incredibly easy to take down with high damage from any source. They may fight to the last man, but if you can get them down to that last man before they land a hit, you'll be in a much easier position to finish them off fast. Focus them with range damage, since you don't have to worry about armor piercing, since you just don't need any. Just pile on as much damage from any source as you can before they get too much of their own. They're glass cannons, so smash them up real good, and you should be fine. Another bonus the Dwarves have going for them about their size is the tiny hitboxes. Like I said, they may have little legs, but their little bodies make them a lot harder to land shots, particularly with ranged troops. Shooting them over the heads of melee troops is basically impossible, so you'll need to get angles for pretty much every missile unit you have. This will be a lot less risky since they're so slow, but it's still another step you'll have to take to deal damage to them. The Dwarves also have access to their unique Law of Magic. Unlike traditional laws, this is entirely cooldown based instead of relying on winds of magic, so can be used the same in any battle. It's nothing super overpowered, but it has something for any occasion to make their troops tougher, deal more damage, deal spell damage, or reduce the damage of your troops. I wouldn't call their casters the most high value targets on the field, but taking them out will shut down any potential bonuses, so if you can, then go for it, but don't do it at the expense of winning the battle. And lastly, for their leaders, they have a small but effective selection. It's nothing really that exciting, but they have leaders for each part of their roster, from front lines, to slayers, to missile troops, and of course the casters. Most of these are moderately effective in combat themselves, but bring spicy buffs for allied units, so taking them down will make the rest of the combat a lot easier. Just like casters, don't rush them down to the detriment of the overall battle, but if you can take them down fast, absolutely go for it, since you'll be bringing down everything around them at the same time. Now, if I was building a comp to count the Dwarves, it'd probably go something like this. Front lines, I want shields no matter what. Their ranged troops have far too much damage to approach them without. It doesn't really matter what the damage stats are, since they're more or less going to be there to keep melee infantry still, so we can pressure the rest of the army. As long as they can stick around for a very long while and not die to the first few ranged barrages, that's all that matters. For ranged of your own, I'd say focus on armor piercing, but if they're bringing slayers, summon on will work just fine to take them down from a safe distance. Honestly, if you can target their backlines, then do so first, as they're a major threat. Once they're dealt with, get some flanks off to take down their front lines, being sure to focus on high value targets like lords and heroes if you get the option. If you have the option, then some monsters for the front lines would be great to beef up the damage a bit and take down their front lines moderately faster. Some fast, high damage cav will also be a must pick to pressure their back lines. You can go for cycle charge if you can handle this, as it will be the fastest way to take them down, But if you're not confident, then sustained combat will get the job done, albeit slower and a little less safely. For leadership, I'd take a high damage duelist if you have one. Their lords and heroes can be a pain to take down, so focusing them down one by one will help speed things along significantly, especially if they can get buried in the front lines. For spells, obviously avoid any lore that relies too much on spell damage, instead focus on buffing your own units with more armor piercing damage, and debuff their units with leadership and defense. You just want to speed up taking down their troops, since the longer the battle goes on, the worse off your units are going to be, and the more theirs will start to outlast you. And that is just about everything on how to beat the Dwarves. Let me know if you have any questions or anything you think I missed in the comments below. Join the Discord to vote on who you want to see how to beat next. Like, subscribe, and if you want to know how to beat more factions, then check out this video on how to beat the Greenskins.